Do you want to pray?
Yeah. Father, we thank you so much for this time to reconvene with one another. I thank you for the things that you are revealing to us in this season. I just ask for a continuous heart to seek what you have to offer, Lord, and what you are so willingly giving to us. I pray that the things that are taught today would not be taken lightly and just as another day at school, but we would take everything as important as it is. Thank you for your grace upon us and your love for us, Lord. How you are slow to anger. And how you let us make mistakes and not understand things. Just ask for a blessing over this time, in each heart and mind, and over those who are teaching today. And that we would have open ears to receive when you are speaking to them, Father. Amen.
We're on 1428?
29, I think.
Mm-hmm.
29, okay. Let's see. I'll have Isaac read the first part and then Benji the second.
Zhigong was given to criticizing others. The master remarks sarcastically, "What a worthy man Zhigong must be. As for me, I hardly have time for this."
Despite the importance of being able to evaluate the character of others that has been stressed throughout this book, one must not be too eager to pass judgment on others. As we saw immediately in 1428, even the master did not presume to declare himself a true gentleman or sage. And in that light, Zhigong's pretension to be an arbiter of virtue becomes even more absurd. This passage might also be compared to other passages where Zhigong is criticized by Confucius for being too strict and judgmental with others, for not moderating his duty-defined demands on others with understanding. The translation follows Zhen Xuan, who reads fan as equivalent to bum. Criticize, slander. This is supported by 15.25. When it comes to other people, who should I criticize and who should I praise? And is how the passage is understood in the record of the three kingdoms. Criticism and praise are the source of hatred and love, and the turning point of disaster or prosperity. Therefore, the sage is very careful about them. This is why Confucius said, quotes in 15.25 and 14.29, even with the virtue of a sage, Confucius was this reluctant to criticize others, how more reluctant would someone of moderate virtue be to carelessly criticize and praise? This is also how the passage is understood by Wu Kangxi, who remarks, "If day and night I am ceaselessly toiling away at the task of self-examination, where will I find the time to examine others? If I focus my attention on criticizing others, then my efforts with regard to regulating myself will be lax. One cannot be on guard against this fault. Cannot but be on guard against this fault."
It's very related to our last couple of young people's meetings.
What do you think?
I think that, in my opinion, it displays the only type of judgment we really ought to do in this season of our lives, and that is the judgment to itself, and not necessarily in a condemnation way, but I guess a better word is self-examination rather than self-judgment. But I appreciate that it mentions that not only from a source of humility as to why you should not be so quick to judge others, but also by a caution of danger. Criticism and praise are the source of hatred and love, and the turning point of disaster or prosperity. I think our words often have a lot more power than we give them credit for. And so in that light, not only is it wrong, I think, from a perspective of pride to judge others, but I think also in this light from a perspective of meddling with powers that are often a little far beyond you. Actually, instead of using the word wrong for judgment, which I don't necessarily think is incorrect, but I like that the perspective he shares is it's pointless. What good would I have from judging others when I could spend much more time examining myself?
What do y'all think that means to judge someone else?
I think it can be openly or internally. It doesn't necessarily have to just be through words expressed out loud.
So that is part of the point of this Analect is the carefulness towards which anyone should have towards that outward expression of judgment. And that's what I wanted to understand is what we mean by judgment. So, in a broader sense, judgment's usually like this critical thing. So, criticism specifically is judgment as we tend to understand it. But in the broader sense, to judge something is to it's to ascertain and like proclaim its value. There's a better way to put that. So that could, in another way, that could also have to do with something that affirms someone else. So that's why the carefulness here is not just towards criticism, which is how we understand judgment usually, but also towards praise. You're just as careful about how often you praise someone. Because undue criticism would be the fault of leaning too much on that side of things, while flattery would be leaning too much on the side of praising or undue praise. So that's why I asked, what do you think is meant by, or what does it even mean to judge someone?
To determine its value based on what you think of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was saying. The focus there is the pride of it. Is judging something assumes an air of authority that you have on it.
I think there's another aspect of judgment that's more about assessment.
Examination.
It's So I think that probably there is that side of judgment that is based on error, basically. But there's another part of judgment that is related to a standard. And so then it's not about error. It's about the standard. It's something that's measured to a standard. It's like a balance. And yes, we're on an interesting side of not history, because this has always been in many ways man's understanding of judgment. I guess we can use that word, but judgment is met out in righteousness from God's throne. So there's a righteous standard. And so the determination or the evaluation that is made is not simply, is this below standard, but things are exposed for what they really are in the essence. And so even on the punitive side of God's righteous judgment, the heart of God in it is that all come to the standard itself, not that a decision is made against something. And so, in this particular instance, you have someone who is critical. So they're using something against people. The other side of judgment is to raise people up to the standard. It's a very different perspective on the way that a standard is used. Some use it as an iron rod to punish. Others use it as a high goal to pursue. And that's two very different ways of perceiving judgment, but they're both valid understandings of judgment. They're just different sides of it. And they produce something very different from within. Clearly, I think that's part of the commentary here is Confucius was very much a judge of character. But what he was really about was unveiling the standards so that it could be something that's sought after by his disciples. Because even he and his inner man, like the one Analect where he's like, man, if I woke up and I saw my disciples living in the way, then I could die. So he's not looking to say, you're wrong and this is the consequence of your wrongness or anything like that. He's looking for a desire within others to be raised up to this high standard of the way, the mean, the doctrine of the mean. So anyway, there's a lot to even the word judgment, and we our language and our history and our legal system, they lean toward this downward, demolition style of judgment, where God's righteous judgment is one that actually draws up and brings forward and lifts up, because it's the whole desire. And yes, there are the natural consequences side of that. So even in a court of law, the judge himself is making judgment, but not his own. He's judging according to a standard. I think that helps us better understand even our own national judicial system in a way that it is not currently perceived. The current generation perceives, especially because we start to use words like enforcement, law enforcement, right? It's this negative connotation about authority, about the use of authority, but actually those are really good things. And even the apostles talked about that and specifically in relation to a very oppressive empire, the Roman Empire, who met these things out with an iron fist. But they actually said, well, actually there's no reason to fear it. The only person that has to fear it is the one who's doing what? Breaking the law. Not living according to the standard. And so, anyway, even God laid that out where in the blessings and the curses that are given in Deuteronomy towards the end, he said, if you live according to this standard, it's going to literally be blessing upon blessing for you. And if you deviate from this standard, it's going to be curse upon curse upon curse, because one thing will lead to another in this cyclical way that draws you down. So you're either drawn up by the standard or you're drawn down under it because of your... And then later Jesus would say something similar in relationship to the light. So if you look at what is it? That's John chapter 1, I think, in the Gospel of John. Okay. Well, verse 6 says, there came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. So the light, in this sense, is this revelation of truth, the right way. Okay? He came as a witness to the light, the true light that gives light, so that brings the understanding, the living example of what this right way is. That gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. They didn't understand that he was the light. They didn't understand that he was the embodiment of the way. But his own did not receive him, yet to all received him, those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So he continues there, and then, where's this verse that I'm looking for? It is, you know where it's at, John?
Which one?
He says it's basically the judgment is this. The verdict. I can't remember. If it's in John. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, here it is. It's in 3:19. This is the verdict. Okay. What happens when the judge sits on his podium, calls the court back into session? Ching, ching, ching. Right. Here's the verdict. This is the judgment that is passed. Okay. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light. Because why? Because their deeds were evil. They don't want to live according to that standard. They want to live according to their own standard. Everyone who does evil hates the light. They don't want to come into that. Why? They won't come into the light for the fear that his deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives in the light by the truth, whoever lives by the truth that comes into the light, or whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God. So this is a statement about the true nature of judgment as it applies to the lives of men from the perspective of the righteous standard of God. And the whole of the message of John is actually that Jesus was fully representative of this way that was supposed to, the presentation of the standard. You know, I am the fulfillment of the law, right? I'm the embodiment of it. This is what it was meant to look like in practice in a human life. And so that was this emanation of the light of life through him. And that was a standard. In fact, Jesus says in the same gospel, I have not come to judge, but his coming was the judgment, because he was the representative standard to which all were to. So when I am lifted up, I will draw all men to me, drawing to him. So we typically think of these statements by Jesus in the conventional teaching in Christianity is to be something related to heaven or hell, salvation or not, because that's the way we perceive judgment, rather than a righteous standard of light and glory and truth that we can be raised into. And that's the empowerment that's given to us through Christ. We have the right to become. So we actually are given the power that is at work in us to be made to be conformed to this righteous standard. It's a very, not opposing view, but a very different view. Because there is this aspect of judgment that is also related to condemnation. But it's actually not its primary meaning or purpose. It is a secondary effect of, the darkness fleeing. That's, you turn a light on, darkness scatters, right? So you cannot deny the darkness, nor the fact that it is pushed away by light. That's this secondary effect of the light. But the light itself is not condemnation. The light itself is like this drawing point of revelation. And so the message of John from the very beginning of his gospel is, here we have the God who is always revealing himself in this way, through light, through the, and so this embodiment of the light of the world came in so that we could know God and know the Father, which is what he says toward the end of this gospel, saying, now you've seen the Father, right? And they're still thinking this other way. Show us the Father. He's like, wait a minute, you've been with me this whole time. Don't you know that if you've seen me, you have seen the Father has revealed himself? How? Through this way of life, through this operation of wisdom and righteousness. And that's how John also describes it in his epistle as well. So anyway, I talked a lot, but I wanted to, we went over some of that stuff in the foundational teachings with righteousness, with judgment. That's one of the foundational principles, is eternal judgment. What is eternal judgment? Well, most people think, oh, hellfire, like forever burning in hell, Well, that's like the scattering light part of judgment. It's not actually the living standard by which all things are made known. Light. So only those who don't want to walk in the light are actually the recipients of this other side of judgment. And just tying that quickly back into the judicial formats that we have and the apostles' teaching about those types of authorities and laws, he says, well, actually, the only people that have to fear them are the people who, you can not like a cop for making a speed trap and be like, oh, punk, there's little sneaky Pete back there, the old Smokey hiding behind the bush. But the guy that doesn't speed doesn't worry about that. You know what I mean? It's only the folks that are trying to get away with something that are always like, oh, this is bad, you're bad. Oh, you got me, you're just a punk, and you're just trying to make money, or, whatever it is. That's the overwhelming perspective that we have of law and authority in a depraved and or lawless generation. Only a lawless mind thinks of law as evil, as corrupt. It's not. And I'm not trying to defend our legal system in its entirety or defend the fact or reality that there is corruption in it. But when we continue back to the source of all things, then we can better understand the standard itself. And then from that understanding, have a better perspective or a more holistic perspective of judgment. I hope that's helpful to you guys.
I think the thing that stands out to me with that is, but for those who love truth, will come into the light. Mm-hmm. And I think that at least in this earth at this time, that our duty is not to bring others into the light. It's not our duty to force judgment upon others, to use the the language here. Yeah, to not pass judgment on others.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way that is described here, that you are describing, judgment is our lives being held to that standard.
You are the judgment.
Exactly. We are that light. And so,
You're supposed to be the light, not grab somebody by the neck and burn them with a candle.
if darkness and thereby others flee the light, it's not our responsibility to chase after that. But it is to be the light, and those that are drawn to it, to be that for them. And so I think that's where the point that they were making here about judgment is it wasn't necessarily about because even the wording was given to criticizing others, not necessarily passing judgment was in the commentary. But I appreciate the demarc there.
Yeah, the demarcation.
Yeah, because there is a big difference.
So look at 12, John chapter 12 as well. Jesus cried out, which means this is a very interesting placement for Jesus, because we don't realize what it was like in certain. I think that there's one good example I think that was given. You see in the gospel movies where John the Baptist is there and the religious teachers come and they're like, are you this and are you this and you're this, and they're standing in close proximity, and then he's like, I'm alive, and they're just like, like, why'd you do that? Like, you're a total wacko. This is one of those instances where Jesus cries out. When a man believes in me, he does not believe in me only. This is 12:44. But in the one who sent me. When he looks at me, he sees the one who sent me. I have come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. As for the person who hears my words, so let's be clear about certain aspects of the light. Light also comes through instruction, teaching. Not that you arrest somebody and put them behind bars and chain them to the floor and preach at them, okay? But to be the light there's an expression that takes place, okay? As for the person who hears my words but does not keep them, I do not judge him. See, there you go. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save it. There is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. That very word which I spoke will condemn him in the last day. For I did not speak on my own account. You see, there's a righteous standard, and I am the living representation of it. It's beyond me, but I am in full alignment with it. But the Father who sent me commanded me to say what to say and how to say it. Interesting. I know that this commandment leads to eternal life, so whatever I say is just what the Father has told me to say. Now that's what it means to be the light. And later on Jesus would say so in the same gospel where he had said, I am the light of the world. Then he commends his own followers, his disciples, and says, you are the light of the world, because I have imputed something of me, which is from my Father, into you. So then there are other places where it says things like, you don't hide a light under a bowl. A city on a hill is meant to be this place of where the light emanates from it. It's very visible. It's not hidden. It is out there for others to see. Now, if they are shunned by it, well, Jesus says here, I don't judge them. But the fact that the light shined on them, and they ran from it, that is the judgment. So be the light. Be the light of the world. And then, as there are so many scriptures, obviously, but God is the one who is the judge. He is the one who vindicates. He is the one who brings retribution. He is the one who fulfills or mets out the result of that standard. So clearly, there's an indication here in this particular Analect that someone like Zhigong is placing himself in the position in an improper position as it relates to his judgment of others, criticism.
Yeah, it's super good in the Passion Translation. I like that. I've never read that before here. I like that it's Jesus' last public teaching.
Oh, is that what it says?
Yeah, that's cool. I like that when you resonate with something before you've even read it, because that scripture is exactly what I had on my heart, and I've never read it before.
Oh, interesting. It's in the same chapter in verse 30 that he says, after the voice speaks from heaven, so that's this higher authority and confirmation of whom and what the light is. He says, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. So here we can see even the proclamation of judgment is not to judge. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. Darkness. Okay? Light, dark. But when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. That's the nature of a righteous standard. Raise up the standard. What was the standard? The greatest emanation of light? The willingness of Christ before his Father to lay down his life. For his will. Not simply just to die, but in accordance with the eternal purpose of God, who is righteous in all his ways. Matt, we're on 1429 today. I saw you join in a little bit ago.
Thank you.
(1430) says, the master said, do not worry that you are not recognized by others. Worry rather that you yourself lack ability. Plays an interesting way to Burger's one. Zhigong Canton comments, this is because having ability or not is something that lies within one's own control, whereas whether or not one is recognized is under the control of others. Something implied in the previous one has to do with the taking up of time and energy involved in criticizing and praising other people, which is seen both in how Confucius actually says, I hardly have time for this. At the end of the commentary, Wukangjai says, if I focus my attention on criticizing others, then my efforts with regard to regulating myself will be lax. I think one way it could be seen is, with criticism especially, but with praise also, you kind of, you more or less open a can of worms with a person. Maybe I don't mean to put it that negatively, but you kind of start a dialogue or you start a conversation with somebody in a sense, because there's different kinds of criticism. I doubt Zhigong was the kind of person that hurled abuse at people, so he wanted to be able to shout criticism from a distance and not expect anything in return. I'm sure Zhigong, knowing the kind of character he was, and what we read is a person that actually did prefer to have influence over other people. And much of the way that was initiated was, as we see here, in the way that he would be very open about his opinion and judgment concerning another person's practice of certain virtues or lack thereof. So what that does is begin between Zhigong and the person under his criticism is I would say it could begin like a false kind of discipling, where this is obviously coming from a false idea on Zhigong's part as to what it actually means to be a good judge and reader of other men's lives, and furthermore, a true gentleman in the way he demonstrates his virtue. He's obviously being a little intellectual about it, so if he's able to catch people's attention with his words by either criticizing them, as we see here, or catching their attention with praise, as other people would, then maybe I can start to pour into a person's life and start to explain to them what the right way is. But that comes from, as I mentioned in the commentary we just read, it comes from a dutifulness that's not balanced by really understanding the other person. The clearest way to me that I always saw that was that, and this is partly how Zhigong was, as it would be portrayed a very rigid personality, so like always having nothing to do with other people, but always being straightforward and virtuous in one's own actions, so kind of having a mind more for one's own righteous character in the midst of other people. So yes, that comes across very often as very self-righteous, But I think a more nuanced view of someone like Zhigong would actually be that he had like the standard idea of what a gentleman looked like, and he knew that virtue was meant to, as the master said, sway the common people like wind would the grass. And so he still probably had a very intentional mind towards his influence over the common people. And so he may have still been a very engaging person, but the manner of his engagement was lacking, in that it was all a matter of correcting others' faults and then inserting oneself, himself, as the right way to act and live and do things and speak. And the only thing Confucius had to say about that manner of doing things was, man, he must be a really worthy person. But in the way I see it, I don't have any kind of time for this way of doing things. So I'm sure, or at least I would be very interested to know how Zhigong responded to something like that, because I'm sure he thought he was even outperforming the other disciples in his adherence to everything the master taught. Because though he had a faulty notion of what the walking on the way was, he was very strongly committed to that notion. Another place, I think he's the disciple described by Confucius as the one overshooting the mark. And you are always going to overshoot. That's kind of the perfect analogy for a person who doesn't balance his sense of, or his virtue of dutifulness with understanding. And so he's missing. What is he missing when he's missing understanding? He's missing his ability to properly read and, to use the word again, truly understand another life. And you'd think that would probably be a pretty important thing to be able to do before you start involving yourself in the business of correcting and judging other lives. So he's really going about it pretty blindly. Obviously not hitting the target. That's why I think 1430 is an interesting follow-up, because it is somewhat indirect a way to address a character like Zhigong's.
You see it exactly, what you mean. And related to what we read about being the light, it's, if you substitute the words, it's don't worry about seeking out people and bringing them to the light.
Mm-hmm.
If you are really a light, people will come to you.
Mm-hmm. It also would point out maybe someone like Zhigong's not actually concerned enough about whether or not he has, as it's put in 1430, has the ability to properly exercise and demonstrate virtue. Which I wanted to say when we were talking about the example of light earlier. That is the same concept of the power that virtue is. Not just has, but is. That Chinese word, de, is what's used for virtue. It's also the same word that can be translated as charisma. And what's the root word for charisma again? Is it
In English or Chinese?
no, the Greek behind that?
Oh.
Justin's mentioned it a few times.
I think that it's a similar sounding word.
Yeah, but it means something more specific. Yeah, favor and grace. In Greek, powers. Yeah. But we know what charisma is in the English usage of the word. It's something that does sway other hearts and other minds, or it draws them. And so, virtue is more or less the equivalent of, and I'd say virtue with the capital V, not just any old virtue in the Greek sense. It is equivalent to the light that someone carries. And that makes it all the more important that we don't interpret virtue as being this self-authored thing, but something that is authored in us. Something that comes from beyond our own wisdom and strength and efforts, obviously. All of that would be and is temporal.
The convergence of this stuff, it just continues to kind of bewilder and fascinate me. But Christine Beadsworth's latest podcast is on the spirit of criticism. Starts out and spends a good deal of time dedicated to that. So if you are interested, it might be something to check out.
Yeah, that's all definitely ongoing. Very interesting. One thing I do notice is that the closer we are to people, the louder we want to be about the critical thoughts we have about them, right? I think it is a very natural thing to internally judge or criticize others. So even people, and it's easy to do so in a very baseless and even a prejudiced way towards people you don't even know. So someone just walking down the street that dresses a certain way, or you see two people holding their hands that you shouldn't think, or you think shouldn't be, those kind of things. That's very quick. You don't think about it, kind of judgment. And so the matter is not first to determine or judging yourself, like, is this good or bad that I'm judging this person? I think that is kind of the way to address the fruit of what's actually taking place, and not the root of it. You're just kind of looking at the result of something that is working in a much deeper place in you. All of this is a constant rubbing against or collision of value systems, basically. Because very, very, very few people that you see doing something that is wrong or worthy of judgment and criticism believe themselves that they are doing a wrong and bad thing. So you never look at someone with, in the way we use this word most often, an evil mind. You're looking at someone with, if you know the light, if you know truth, you're looking at someone with a mind of darkness, someone it is in the dark, which again does not refer to ill-intentedness, it refers to ignorance. And so, how does that end up changing the way you perceive another person? Are you not able to distinguish between the soul or the heart of a person and their acts? You can definitely see the condition of the soul and the heart through the acts, but the soul and the heart and the acts are not the same thing. In fact, I do think they inform one another, and they inform the observer. One informs the observer about the other, but I don't think they are to be judged, to be criticized as one and the same thing, is what I'm saying. And that's why you apply, as is being encouraged here, so much more caution towards, at the very least, or to begin with, your voiced criticism and your voiced praise of another person. Because even virtuous or good or impressive acts may not fully reflect the true condition of a person's heart or character or soul. And so it is in part a matter of giving things time. There's definitely a patience to be applied towards your ascribing a value to someone's life. I think it is less time is needed to ascribe value to just a person's actions, but all the more caution and time is needed to do the same for a person's soul, a person's heart, which is why you would see someone like Confucius be very hesitant to ever label one person as one thing or another, whether it had to do with positive or negative things.
I think in a way, it also kind of relates, if you look back at 14.26, right, it's really talking about, the taking responsibility for the things that you need to be responsible for, right? Well, you're not responsible for the work of God in somebody else's life necessarily, right? Now, certainly certain people have been given that responsibility positionally, but if you don't find yourself in that spot, then is it really your job to ascribe some label or value to somebody else, right? No, worry about what's in your sphere. Pay attention to yourself, right? The things that you are responsible for. And Noah, to your point, let the other person be what they're going to be.
The Analects 4.3 is interesting. It says, the master said, only one who is good is able to truly love others or despise others. Within that commentary it says, this is why such a person is said to be able to love others and despise others. Only the good person is an accurate and impartial judge of character, able to love virtue in others without envy and despise vice in others without malice.
Did you say 14.3?
No, I said 4.3, I'm sorry. So what is never condoned here is this reminds me a little bit of the conversation last week we had about Confucius' answer to should you answer injury with kindness, like that discussion. What is not condoned here is an unwise and foolish love, which actually many believers call unconditional love, which is, as they understand that phrase, is a loving in the face of, like a kind of a blind love in the face of wickedness, or in the face of damaging or unclean things, whatever it is. The scripture that might be used to validate that is that love covers a multitude of sins. But love is never without, true love is not ever without wisdom. And wisdom is able to see and to deal with those things of darkness. And deal with is not like, kind of like Matt was saying, perhaps you do have a place in another's life to address such things, and maybe you don't. Wisdom first identifies the place that you have in relation to the person. But what did Jesus himself do in the midst of the people of his time? And what was he accused of doing? By the Pharisees especially, those very high-minded and very respectable.
Associating with sinners.
Yes, exactly. He hung out with the tax collectors and all of those unclean, perverse people. Who would that look like in our day? This is an interesting conversation because it would seem as if it's like vacillating between like too far one way or too far another every time you take a step forward, because it's not hanging out with it's not hanging out with the weird people of weird is a word we could use, I guess, of Port Angeles versus being in the midst of and fellowshipping with God's people. It's not like you're cutting some difference there per se. But what Jesus obviously was sensitive to were the ones that had the listening ear.
And a desire for change.
Yeah.
You know, in this Analect, he talks about despising some and not others. And the reality is that Jesus, in the example of Jesus, his disposition toward the religious leaders was such that he despised their way of thinking, but he commended their actions, or their, not their actions, but their philosophy. One time Jesus said, "Do what the Pharisees say, just don't do what they do." So and then in other ways, Jesus would look at the desperation of the derelict of society and see their desire for change, and as Noah said, the reception or hearing of him to learn of, and that was kind of tying back to the desire for learning. And, the parable of the lost sheep is like that. I'm not here for everybody who already thinks they're in a safe place. I'm here for those who know they're lost and are looking for the way. I'm not here for the healthy. I'm here for those who know they're sick. I'm not here for the people who think they can see. I'm here to bring sight to those who know that they're blind. And those were not just physical ailments that he was referring to. He was talking about the condition of life and the posture of heart that people have. And so, while Jesus would never condone the behavior of the tax collector or the sinner, he would admonish their behavior, go and sin no more. But his response was directly to them for help, for engagement. That's who I want to go to. Why? Because they're ready for it. Their heart is ready for this. So he's not condoning their activity. And so you have this opposite response where the Pharisee or the teacher of the law says no to you because of your outward appearance and your activity, but they had no gauge of where the person's heart was, so as to see something that could change. Something that was, where, again, Jesus looked at them and said, you're hardened, you're calloused, you're unchangeable, you're hard-headed, you're stiff-necked. You already know, you already have. And so you won't be able to receive. Actually, that's back in John 12. The exact same thing. If you did, then everything could change. If you did have that perspective, then you would see. Your eyes would be open. Your heart would be softened. You would, all those things. Bring a little context to what is in here described as loving others or despising others.
Jaden, do you want to pray for us?
Sure.
Lord, I am thankful and excited to see the convergence of what you are doing in this people in this season and what you are doing with your work. Father, I pray for myself and all those who agree that we would be ever in humility and contriteness before you. Examine and judge our hearts, Father. But there's nothing offensive to you within there. And that if and when there is, that would be drawn out by your judgments, by your standard, by your light. Let us be ones that do not fear the light, that do not hide from its glare, but that become one with it. That bear your standard just as you bear it in our hearts. What an opportunity. Let us be slow to speak and quick to listen, Father, to each other and to you. Let our ears be tuned to your whispers, our bodies sensitive to your winds.